Everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session. My name is Margherita Trombetti, and tonight, together with my colleague Vlad, we are going to talk about the future of the European Union Emission Trading System after Brexit. So first things first, we're going to put things into context, meaning that we're going to explain what the emission trading is, what the aim of our research has been, and we will conclude some recommendation and outlook. As we all know, addressing environmental and climate issues rank among the top priorities of both the European Union and the United Kingdom. But the country's departure from the European Union now risks compromising the achievement made so far in the trajectory towards the realization of the Paris Agreement targets. There is in particular one field of cooperation that risks being significantly negatively affected by Brexit, which is the cooperation in the emission trading system. This is because this form of cooperation has been going on for 15 years and is one field of intervention by both the parties, by both the EU and the UK, which has significantly contributed to the realization of the international climate objectives by significantly reducing the emissions within the Union's territory. The ETS, as the name suggests, this is an overview of what we're going to talk about tonight. So first we're going to give an introduction explaining what the ETS is and why it is threatened by Brexit. Then we're going to analyze and explore some policy options, some forms of cooperation that can be implemented in the post-Brexit relationship as far as the ETS is concerned. Because actually the ETS is also open to cooperation with the EU third countries. And lastly, we are going to provide you with a recommendation and an outlook of the possible forms of cooperation in the short and long term. As we were saying, the EU ETS is as the name suggests, a market-based mechanism where permission to emit greenhouse gases are traded among the participating entities. These entities are identified by the European Commission regulation, which discipline the ETS, and are in particular energy-intensive industries and power plants, accounting for 45% of the total emissions within the Union territory. Now, with the this mechanism, this market-based systems, is intended to progressively reduce harmful emissions by incentivizing industries, the participating industries, into turning to renewable sources for production purposes. This is reached thanks to the cap and trade principle, which is at the basis of the market. Cap and trade means that there is a maximum amount of emissions that are allowed every year, and in particular every trading phase. And this cap, this total amount, is progressively reduced over time, and to which it should correspond an increase in the price of carbon. This is again to incentivize industries to turn to renewable forms of energy for their production purposes, while abandoning fossil fuels. So far, or better, until the 31st of December 2020, so until the UK was still part of the European Union, the industries covered by the system were 11,000, 1,000 of which were UK installations. the loss of these participants is significant and can significantly compromise the effectiveness of the EU ETS, because, and this is why it is threatened in the first place, because these industries were active players on the market. They were just 1,000, but they were still significantly contributing to the effectiveness of the system. They were active players, so they participated in huge numbers of transactions, ensuring carbon price stability and liquidity, while avoiding price volatility issues. And they also steered and function as intermediaries for transactions between other participants. So with the UK's departure from the European Union and from the ETS in particular, the effectiveness of the system risks being compromised. Also, the seriousness of the climate objectives and the intention to reduce emissions might be compromised, might not be taken into consideration anymore by these industries if they are not subject to these stringent rules any longer. So in our paper, this is why in our paper, we argue that some form of collaboration between the European Union and the United Kingdom is not only possible, but should be pursued thoroughly and in a consistent way. To this end, we have analyzed, in particular, two forms of cooperation that already exist between the EU and third countries when it comes to the emission trading system. This is in particular important because we have then explore their characteristics, the prerequisites for the collaboration, and have then moved on to assess the possibility, the feasibility of turning these form of collaboration into practice and be replicated in the post-Brexit relationship. This is what I'm going to talk about right now. First of all, I'm going to present the Norwegian model of cooperation. This is the so-called Norwegian model because, as the name suggests, one of the countries, the third countries participating in ETS is Norway. The other ones are Iceland and Liechtenstein. So these are the European Economic Area member states who have merged their domestic ETS in order to participate in the European Union Emission Trading System. This is, I recall, for those of you who are not familiar with the topic, the European Union Emission Trading System is the biggest market of this type around the globe, and is the most effective so far, also thanks to the participation of these third countries. This form of cooperation is defined as a complete merger of the systems because not only these systems are technically compatible and perfectly overlapping when it comes to the scope of application and to the cap, but also because there exists just one European Union registry that track all the transactions that occur between the participants. All the participants are entitled to participate in the same auction platform. There exists one single type of emission allowances that can be traded, and that is the European Union allowances. And also the rules regarding monitoring, reporting, and verifying the exchange of emissions and the emissions themselves is unique, and everything, like all the rules governing this system, are disciplined at EU level. This means that the EEA states that participate in the EU ETS do not have the legislative power to intervene in amending the rules that govern the system, but must simply abide by these rules without having the power to intervene. When it comes to like to conclude, when it comes to the judicial body in charge of addressing disputes concerning interpretation and application of the rules of the system. The jurisdictional power is split between the European Court of Justice when it comes to issues or questions arising from a member state, whereas if the question is arised by an EEA state, then it is the European Free Trade Association Court that is responsible to decide. We argue that this model of cooperation, the so-called Norwegian model, can be, to a certain extent, replicated in a post-Brexit relationship, although there are some factors that might weigh in against the concrete feasibility of the system. Among the elements that weigh in favor of feasibility is the fact that the EU ETS and the UK domestic one, which has been already envisioned in UK government documents, have a high degree of compatibility, meaning that they are both mandatory, they have an absolute cap, they have rules regarding monetary reporting and verifying that are basically the same, and that the subjective scope of application is very similar. So from this point of view, there wouldn't be any problem in replicating the model. At the same time, though, there are some challenges, especially of a political nature. All these challenges fall under the condition that refers to the condition that the UK has repeatedly and since the very beginning of the Brexit process affirmed its reluctance, its strong opposition, to continue observing EU rules. But instead is more keen on taking back control over its legislative power, and so it wouldn't. So the feasibility of replicating this model of cooperation is compromised precisely because the UK has no intention and has shown it clearly to continue being subject to EU law, especially since with this form of cooperation it will lose any power to decide over to contribute in the decision towards legislative amendments governing the system. Also, another political consideration is that while in principle the EEA, for the UK to be part of this merger, it would need to be part in the first place to the EEA states. And while this is in principle not impossible, because no position in this sense has been expressed, at the same time the process would be long, and so this makes this option of collaboration not feasible, at least in the short term. Nonetheless, there might be some common interests and benefits for the parties that should be taken into consideration when deciding which forms of cooperation to implement in their post-Brexit relationship. And in particular, as we recalled, the fact that the fact that the UK would continue to participate in the ETS would make the ETS a very populated market, meaning that there is price stability and it would avoid, to a certain extent, liquidity issues. Also, it would offer legal certainty to businesses, not only UK businesses, but also EU businesses and industries covered by the system, which would then could be then able to continue to trade with their partners, with their historical partners, ensuring an overall effectiveness, a continued overall effectiveness of the system. This leads to the common interest of both the parties that should be taken into consideration. The first one being that they would participate in the world's biggest emission allowances market in the world, and one which is extremely, has proven to be extremely successful, linking this to another common interest, which would be the fact that the two parties could maintain and continue and progressively enhancing their efforts to achieving their international climate objectives that aim, and in primis, reducing drastically greenhouse gas emissions. This was one first type of collaboration that the two parties could pursue in their future relationship. Another one that we authors have identified is known as the Swiss model. This is because, as the name suggests, again, it is a form of cooperation between the EU and the Helvetic Confederation. So the collaboration is dubbed as a mere linkage, and because it differs itself from a total merger for some elements. So while it is this type of cooperation, this type of linking is similar to the merger, because again, both systems are mandatory, they have an absolute cap, and have the same subjective scope of application. At the same time, there are some elements that make Switzerland more independent from the ETS when it comes to, for example, having their own rules governing the system. So this means that the third country, Switzerland, in a sense, can decide its own rules and amend its own rules, so have legislative autonomy. Also, Switzerland has its own Swiss registry and its own emission allowances, but these registries are the EU registry and the Swiss registry are connected, so that transactions transactions are recognized between industries participating in either scheme, and they can also trade allowances, the respective allowances with other partners. This is because there is a mutual recognition of the other parties' allowances. So in concrete terms, one Swiss industry participating in a Swiss ETS can still trade its allowances with EU partners because the two types of allowances are mutually recognized. And to conclude, another important feature of this form of cooperation is that in case a dispute concerning the interpretation of application of rules governing either system arises, then it is first and foremost referred to a joint committee, so made of representatives of both parties. And in case the controversy cannot be solved at this stage, it will then be referred to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, leaving the final outcome totally independent from any EU possible interference. And so again, a difference with the merger type known with the Norwegian model of cooperation. Of course, we have asked ourselves whether this form of cooperation might be possible to replicate in the post-Brexit relationship, again, by assessing the challenges and the feasibility. When it comes to feasibility, well, we have found out that again, putting in place this type of cooperation between the EU and the UK would be highly possible, because many of the provisions that would form the basis of the linking agreement have been already agreed. But at the same time, there remains some issues of a political nature. Basically, it's all about political issues that remains. On the one hand, the UK has shown a mixed political willingness to agree to this form of cooperation, because of course, on the one hand, it would be extremely appealing for it to have this form of cooperation because it could retain its regulatory power, and it would be sure that any judicial body deciding on the dispute would not fall within the scope of the EU legal order. At the same time, though, the UK has expressed its intention to increase its efforts towards the realization of the Paris Agreement objectives and set a cap that is tighter than the one currently in place within the EU ETS. And so this divergence in caps might lead to an improbability of applying this system. At the same time, there is also the UK, an EU reluctance of agreeing to this form of agreement, basically because it has taken, at least when it comes to the Swiss case, almost 7 years to conclude, because the negotiations started in 2013, but the linking agreement came into force only on the 1st of January 2019. So the fact that the procedure to establish this form of cooperation is lengthy and costly might weigh against the feasibility. So there are both pros and cons to the Swiss model of cooperation when it comes to turning it into concrete terms. However, again, the parties should not focus only on just these elements, these obstacles, but look at the bigger picture and look at the benefits that they would receive from this kind of participation, which is basically the same as the ones that we mentioned when assessing the feasibility of the Norwegian model of cooperation. So again, numerous participants, legal certainty and overall effectiveness, and to which we should add the fact that, at least for the UK, it would retain legislative power to govern its own domestic system and be ensured that there is judiciary independence on any questions regarding interpretation of application of the rules. And when it comes to the common interest, then again, the two parties would benefit from continuing participating in the biggest market in the world. So the EU would ensure that its system will still remain highly effective on the performance level. Also, they would be able to maintain collaboration with important partners, because the UK has been indeed an important partner for the EU in this context, and vice versa. The UK has immensely benefited from participating in the scheme. And again, in more general terms, the common interest would be to keep up with their efforts towards the progressive realization of emission reduction targets, to which they have committed themselves to at international level. Now that we have gone through all these two potential forms of cooperation, it is time to move to the recommendation part. So I'm happy to leave the floor to my colleague and co-author of this policy paper, Vlad, who is going to take us through the recommendation that we have identified and providing us with a brief outlook of the possible relations. Please.
Thank you very much, Margherita. So moving to the recommendations, I think the first lesson that we took from analyzing the two models, the Norwegian model and the Swiss model, was that there are a plethora of options for both the United Kingdom and the European Union to create a new deal, to reach an agreement in order to maintain a strong climate ambitious objective, a common environmental objective, specifically through the enhancement of their internal carbon markets. But the second lesson we took from comparing the Norwegian and the Swiss model, and I think this is the key lesson we took, was that any specific model is determined by the local conditions and the bilateral conditions between the European Union and the third party, the third country. In this case, it means that The Norwegian and the Swiss model are just archetypes. And what we want to do is to design a potential way of collaboration between the European Union and the United Kingdom that accounts for the existing current challenges, for the potential benefits, but also mainly accounts for what is politically feasible. So we're not going to propose a specific legal framework, but we're going to look at four principles, at four cornerstone pillars of policymaking that could help create a better carbon market, a better common carbon market in the future. So the first pillar should be flexibility. Flexibility is crucial for both the EU and the UK. And by flexibility, we mean the fact that we need to adapt to different conditions. Especially living in a post-COVID-19 world, many industries will suffer specific challenges that we will need to address. Both on the side of the European Union and on the side of the United Kingdom, climate ambition will have to incorporate the interests of people working in carbon-intensive industries. This might mean that whenever we negotiate climate objectives, common climate objectives, we will need to account for the opinion of different stakeholders that are differently affected by different circumstances. This means that both sides need to be flexible because one industry in the EU might not be affected in the same manner like a similar industry in the United Kingdom. Secondly, we believe that for a common agreement to be reached in the next years, we need to base this agreement on incrementalism. It's no longer enough to have very ambitious idealistic objectives, but we need something pragmatic that can be reformed, that can be, by trial and error, improved. And I think both the United Kingdom, as part of the EU in the past, and the European Union, as the creator of the EU ETS, understand the need for incrementalism. The fact that the EU ETS is in its phase 4 shows that we understood that the lessons that the past taught us, especially, for example, the case of the crisis of 2008, which totally disrupted the way in which we understood the phenomenon of carbon pricing. Maybe the current COVID-19 crisis will not be similar in nature, but what both the UK and the EU need to understand is that whatever happens with the economy, with the political spectrum, it will affect the climate policy. And this means that we need to be realistic and we need to adopt climate policy as fast as possible and improve it step by step. So incrementalism is crucial for cooperation in the field of carbon markets. Thirdly, we believe that resilience is another pillar of future cooperation, a foundational principle. Both the EU and the UK have strong climate ambition. However, there will be challenges that will appear and they need to learn to bounce back. But not only bounce back by being flexible, but by understanding what went wrong and what should be done. This means that between the UK and the EU, regardless of the fact that they have or do not have a common agreement for a common carbon market, they will need to share information, they will need to share know-how, and they will need to share their experience with their currently internal carbon markets. The EU ETS is the biggest carbon market in the world, functioning on this many industries. And it's very important for the UK not to just abandon the information pool existing in the European Union. And lastly, and I think this is very important given the political climate, both the EU and the UK need to avoid opposition movements. Climate policy is something that needs to be done, and it's now more than ever politically feasible. But in order for it to remain politically feasible, both parties need to prevent the apparition of opposition movements. And in the case of carbon pricing, this means looking at the distributional effects of carbon pricing. This means looking at the social policy and preventing fringe political movements from benefiting by accusing the other part of doing something malintended to their respective side. So I think the main point that we want to make is that we're not sure how a common agreement might look in the future, but what we are certain right now is that it will be based on the principle of review and reform, with the two parties having currently two different systems that will be linked, reviewed constantly, including all the stakeholders that are affected, and reformed based on the opinions of the stakeholders at one point in time. And this leads us to the outlook of our presentation. which asks two basic concluding questions. What is to be done now, and what is to be done next? So what is to be done now? First and foremost, we need to continue the dialogue. We are not reaching a common agreement, and we're not going to reach this common agreement soon. However, we need to continue the discussion because it will allow us at the point when we will reach a common objective and we will reach an agreement to base that agreement on the opinions of multiple stakeholders and on solid, constructive, comprehensive debate. Secondly, we need to strengthen the internal systems because if the EU ETS and the UK's internal carbon markets do not function internally, there will be no markets that we can link or that we can integrate. And lastly, we need to learn from past examples. The UK needs to learn from the mistakes of the EU ETS, and when the UK's carbon market will have some challenges, the EU will need to learn from these challenges. So all in all, we need to get the best of the current situation and then move to what is to be done next. We will need to link the systems. They won't be assimilated immediately, but we can link them. There are multiple models for doing this, and Margherita already discussed this thoroughly. But we also need to improve the unified framework. So not just link the systems, but make sure that they work together better than the two systems work separately. This means including similar industries, including similar installations. This means a lot of technicalities that need to be addressed in the coming years. And lastly, and this is the biggest step, we need to integrate climate policy because carbon pricing solves a global problem, the climate externality, which cannot be solved on a local level, but it can be solved globally. And we need to integrate the entire strategies, not only the carbon markets. So the conclusion is we need to make the best of our future framework. Thank you very much. And we are looking forward to any questions you might have for us. And I see the first question that has been posted. I'll just read it right now. So you have discussed the importance of cooperation between the UK and the EU and identified two possible models to do so, and the principles on which the cooperation should be based. What would happen in the case no deal on linking the two ETS system markets is reached? Okay, so I think I can try to answer this. I think the first answer is it depends very much on how the internal systems function, because if somehow both systems, the EU ETS and the national carbon market in the UK function ideally, this won't be very disruptive. However, this is very improbable. From past experience, we see that when we have carbon markets that are geographically close, it means that there are many other impacts that are also shared. For example, there will be problems with the electricity market or with renewable energy policy. When you do not link carbon markets, you also do not link the externalities generated by this type of policy. However, once again, it's very unlikely that no form of linking will arrive in the end. What is most probably going to happen at this point and based on the current developments is that we won't have a perfect alignment of the two markets, but we will have a shared knowledge, shared information, and we will have enough trust as to make the two systems at least not be competing with one another. I think this, I hope this helps answer the question. Oh, and we have another question. How long will this take to implement? I think this depends on how optimistic we are, but it's definitely a very long process. Maybe a basic form of linking could be done in a couple of years, but to create a unified framework for a common market is something that the EU has done over more than a decade, and reaching the current phase of the ETS has taken even more. So it's unlikely that we will reach something as complicated as a common market very soon. However, if we integrate climate policy more broadly, this might happen organically. Okay, are there any other questions from the audience? No. So in this case, thank you very much. And we would like to offer you an opportunity to give us some feedback on the presentation by replying to the poll. Thank you very much once again.
So thank you so much, Margherita and Vlad, for this interesting presentation and recommendations. And thank you to our audience who joined us today. It's really been a pleasure to host this conference and to give you all an overview of our policy paper. And we hope that you enjoyed the different sessions and our ideas on how cooperation could look like in the future between the EU and the UK. And you will be able to find the full paper on our webpage now during the weekend. So don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or if you would like to continue these discussions. And I wish you all a continued good week, a nice weekend, and stay healthy, everyone. Bye-bye.